The content you're about to enjoy comes from the archives of The Best You. We're devoted to the very best in personal development, with a platform and resources dedicated to inspiring and changing people's lives. At The Best You, we work with the world's leading writers and trainers on the evolution of the self, and people whose journeys have been affected by their work and words. For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co. John Richardson is a writer, speaker, entrepreneur from Northern Ireland. In the last 25 years, he has built and sold 19 different businesses and employed more than 1,000 people. He is the author of 3 books on starting and running profitable coffee shops and works as a coach and consultant to the broader hospitality industry. John also wrote the international best-selling golf book, Dream On. This is a story of his 1-year challenge to break par at golf. It is now also a feature film at Elstree Studios in North London. He followed this up with his 50 greatest golf tips. John also coaches authors on how to write successful non-fiction books. There's a great anecdote in the interview where Sam Torrance hears about the challenge and he tells him to dream on. With no natural talent, precious little time, and no fitness level to speak of, how did John pull this off? Well, listen to the interview. I'm sure you're going to love it. So I wanted to interview John because obviously, you know, when you hear that someone was able to do that, and I know that he's done a lot of NLP training, I was very intrigued. I was very interested. How is it possible to try and become a professional golf player in 1 year when I know it takes years and years and years of practice? So I thoroughly enjoyed interviewing John, and I'm sure you will love it too. Thank you so much. Hi, and welcome to Inspiring People. Today we're here with John Richardson. He's a writer, a speaker and entrepreneur from Northern Ireland. Following an eclectic career in the hospitality industry, where he owned a large variety of businesses such as coffee shops, sandwich bars and restaurants, he set about a seemingly impossible golf challenge in 2005. The resulting book, Dream On, has been a huge commercial and critical hit on both sides of the Atlantic and is soon to be a major motion picture. Hi John, how are you?
I'm good to see you.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and where you were born.
Born in Northern Ireland, and I still live in Northern Ireland. I live in a little town called Bangor, just outside Belfast, with my wife and 14-year-old daughter. I do most of my work on this side of the water, but Northern Ireland's actually a great place to live these days. And as I say, I commute backwards and forwards and advise the coffee shop industry, and then we do lots of work with corporate bodies and also working with golfers too.
So tell me, what was your earliest memory when you were brought up in Northern Ireland? What was it like being brought up there?
Well, I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and you grew up in the 70s in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and it's not an awful lot of fun. And one of the earliest memories that I had was, it used to be very exciting because my dad had a furniture business, and the most exciting thing was that we would go out and see the new lorry that he'd bought as a result of the previous one having been burnt out. So that can only go on for so long. Yeah. And then we moved to, he obviously grew fed up with that, and Northern Ireland was no fun. You became very familiar with the concept of hearing bombs in the distance. And then we moved up to Portchurch, which is on the north coast, and sort of then lived a relatively idyllic later childhood away from all the trouble.
How old were you then?
Moved up when I was 9.
Right. And tell me about your parents. What were they like?
Well, they're great. They're still alive. They're great parents. I've been very supportive parents. They helped to provide us, I think, with as normal a lifestyle as you could have in Northern Ireland. We have a great school system there. It was a great childhood, I have to say. You had
a good relationship with them?
Yes. And continue to do so. I don't think I had a brother who's a year and a half older, and I think it's impossible to have 2 boys that close and then sit here and say we weren't naughty. Of course we were naughty.
But you didn't get any serious stuff?
Not any serious trouble, no.
Okay.
Or that I'm prepared to admit in camera.
Yeah. And what was school like for you?
School was okay. I would not say I was by any means a dedicated or naturally grade A student. I would have always veered on the side of just trying to get away with doing enough. I was very much of the type who would leave everything until the last minute. But I managed to vaguely scrape my way through and did eventually end up going to university after, actually, I have to say, failing my A-levels twice, but eventually, and frustrating my parents enormously as a result of that, because I did have the capability. But I was not a sit down and work religiously every evening on my homework boy.
What subjects did you like?
Well, I did end up sort of going down that science side for a long time. I've got 3 A-levels in sciences, and I was vaguely interested in them. I have to say there wasn't a tremendous amount that I sat at school and thought I am completely inspired by any of this.
And what did you study in uni?
Business studies.
Business studies.
Yeah.
Was there anybody in particular that inspired you when you were younger?
Well, yes, fascinatingly, I suppose, like a lot of young boys, I did see heroes in sporting worlds. You grew up in Northern Ireland and everybody is obsessed with George Best, who was, and we would argue, the greatest golfer, the greatest footballer in the world. I liked to always pick out sporting heroes, and I must say, Seve Ballesteros, your countryman, was very much a hero of mine, and he was in that same George Best sort of Muhammad Ali style, Ayrton Senna style of sporting hero who almost transcends the sport, who have that sort of a look that is very different to the norm. And I went and I saw Seve playing. He won the Irish Open in 1982, and me and a couple of friends went down on the train and saw him playing down there. And I remember seeing him and thinking, that is, that's the pinnacle of sporting achievement, because he was incredible at that stage. I was a very big fan of, although my golf was rubbish at that stage, but I saw Seve and I must say he inspired me.
What was your first job when you?
Well, actually, when we lived up in Port Stewart, my first job was working in, I suppose it's ironic considering I advised coffee shops and I've had coffee shops in the past, but it was working in an ice cream coffee shop in called Morelli's up in Port Stewart for 60p an hour. We used to sit there and watch. Every minute went past, we made more 1p. So it was a relatively basic beginning. Yeah.
Would you give yourself any advice now? For those. Other
yeah.
things?
I mean, yes. Do you know what? I think it's. I have a 14-year-old daughter now, and I think you understand actually that giving of that advice versus letting them learn their own lessons, there's quite a difficult balance and a line there. If I was to give myself advice now, back in that stage, I still don't think I'd have paid attention to it. I would have definitely told myself to knuckle down, be a bit more disciplined, just get a little bit of discipline into any sport that I did, because I didn't really do anything. I gave up very, very quickly in terms of anything that I was interested in, and just stop being the acting the lig sort of fella, the wee fella just trying to get a laugh and not doing any work as well. So that caused a lot of pain for my parents. It caused a lot of pain for me. So yeah, just a little bit of self-discipline goes a long way when you're a teenager, Okay. But I suppose in hindsight, I was hardly alone.
Yeah, hindsight's a great one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself happy now?
Yes, I do. I think I think in general I would regard myself as being very comfortable in my skin. That I have a very happy family life. We're all healthy. I have managed to fulfill a tremendous amount of the sort of the childhood dreams that I did have through, I suppose, finally discovering some of the techniques in terms of that discipline. The book has been a great success. I wanted to write a book since the age of 4. I saw Seve, as we discussed at the Irish Open, and thought that I could have been a half decent golfer. I didn't do anything about it then, but subsequently I did manage to sort that. So yeah, I would regard myself as happy. Yeah, which I think is a lovely thing to be able to even admit to myself now.
So you finished uni. Did you go straight to work?
Yes, I came back to Northern Ireland, and at that stage, Northern Ireland was still. This was 1991. Northern Ireland was still a pretty rough place to be. The economy was dreadful, unfortunately, as it is again now. But the economy was dreadful, and there were no jobs. So as I say, I set up a business with one of my closest friends, and we set up a sandwich business. And we bumbled our way through it, doing some stuff very well, some stuff not so well. But we were in the right place at the right time. The market was good for us. Northern Ireland was coming out of the troubles. We had a very good product. We had a lot of sort of early 20s kind of enthusiasm, and we managed to grow a very successful business within a relatively short period of time.
And did you have any inspiration then? Anybody that helped you out, especially?
Not particularly, I would have to say. At that stage, I did start very much to I have a business studies degree, and I think what you learn in a general business studies degree is very corporate. It teaches you how to go out and work within a corporate company. And that does not apply to a relatively small entrepreneurial business. So I started at that stage to really look at my education beyond what I'd learned. And I am an inveterate reader now, and I started to read a lot of business biographies at that stage, and I would probably still continue to do that now.
How old were you then?
I was 25 really when we started that.
Okay. Would you say that was kind of the turning point in your life then?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, not without hiccups, though, because we grew that business. It became the largest sandwich business in Ireland by the time I was 28. But by 29, we kind of lost everything. We had a third partner who came in and caused a lot of problems for us, and he went bankrupt, and we ended up having to sell all our shops to pay off debts that had been accrued. But we'd made a lot of mistakes ourselves, too. It's very easy to sit there and perhaps blame somebody else. We made a lot of those business growth mistakes. And to have to shut down a business and sell off parts of it, even though it was still making money, was a very valuable lesson. And so I learnt through the growth of that business a lot, but I learned a tremendous amount more through the down and then the recovery through into the next businesses.
And that's made you obviously an expert. So, I mean,
yeah, to an extent. But again, I think these things in many cases happen over a number of steps. It's very easy to go through an experience and think, yes, I've done that thing. I've maybe learnt the theory at university. I've maybe had this experience and it's helped me there, and I've done that, and I'm now an expert. But it has taken me many years subsequent to that, and a lot of other businesses, to now put the pieces together, what we regard of as this sort of jigsaw of how you run hospitality businesses.
So you think you're on the right path now?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. We've written a couple of books on running coffee shops and hospitality businesses, and I very much view the first one as a collection of all of those ideas that have been distilled around over those sort of 15, 20 years of working hands-on within the hospitality businesses, the mistakes and the good things. And the second one that starts to come together into much more of a coherent process. We call this the formula. There's a 7-part formula that we created to run that type of a business. And now what we've done is we've gone much, much, much deeper and taken all of those strands within that and thought about the processes and the reactions that might happen if people don't get those right, and how you can keep putting on concepts and ideas and practical solutions. So I think to really get deep to become an expert in anything, you need to keep thinking a lot about it. You need to read a lot and see what other people have been doing, and you need to kind of have been there and made the mistakes yourself.
Have the experiences.
Exactly.
Like having experiences. Yeah. If you could meet anybody from the past or the present, I can envisage who those be. Who would they be? It
would always be Sevi. Yeah. It would always be Sevi. I used to do a little bit of motor racing years ago, and I used to always imagine that Ayrton Senna was sitting beside me. And as much as anything else, that allowed me to sort of sit there and think whenever you were doing something stupid. I used to have him here as this sort of very enigmatic figure who would sit beside me, and he didn't really even have to say anything. But it would contain the way that I would drive. The Sevi became my Senna in terms of the golf. So I literally did the entire year with my not fictional but virtual Sevi on my shoulder, and he was still alive then. And I would have these imaginary conversations with him every time I was doing something stupid, which was relatively regularly. But because when he would offer me these words of advice, and I mean, I sort of got the concept through from, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, where he talks about having, in a mental mastermind, that you can sit down there and imagine all of these people, Ayrton Senna, it's not always just going to be sporting ones, but Sevi, I'm not quite sure how great the advice that George Best might give you would be, but, those people who
could give you some great advice.
I'm sure he could, yeah. and certainly as a teenager, as a boy in my 20s, I would have taken it. But you can sit and imagine, if you can get into your brain enough, you can really see, well, what would Sevi say? What would Ayrton Senna say to me in this particular situation? Or putting out various business leaders.
If you're interested in working with me, contributing to the magazine, maybe speaking at any of our many events around the world, partnering or licensing The Best You, go to www.thebestyou.co.
Let's go back a little bit. For example, if when you watched Sevi for the first time,
yes,
and you were 15,
yes,
and you saw, wow, this guy's amazing,
yes,
what happened then? Because obviously you said, I want to be like him, I want to do this.
Well, you see, what happened then was absolutely nothing. I saw Sevi, was inspired, and did nothing
You didn't
about
start
it.
playing golf next.
I was playing a little bit of golf at that stage. I was playing with a couple of friends, and we'd played quite a lot that summer. My golf hadn't reached any decent stage. But what I saw was Seve, and in my mind, for all of those guys, and of course George Best, I joke about it, but George Best is the worst example of that because he is that pure talent. It's very easy to see Seve in that category and think he's pure talent and disregard the fact that actually Seve endlessly practiced late into the night when he was a child with the cut down 3-iron from his older brother, and all of those great Seve stories and that amount of work. And I just was caught up a little bit at that stage into thinking people become great through talent. And what I didn't do was have anybody that would then sit me down and go, you may not become Seve, but if you really want to get good at golf or whatever, what you need to do is go out there and really practice. To use the Ben Hogan example, the answer is in the dirt, by digging the dirt, by just endless practice. So at that stage, if I was to go back and give myself the advice to come back to your previous question, that is what I would be saying is, don't think it's about talent. Most of these things are about focusing on the hard graft.
Did you carry on playing golf?
I sort of got to the age of 16 and discovered girls and then beer and completely gave up for about 20 years. But I still had this dream.
Did you play?
I played probably 2 or 3 times a year for the first few years, and then sometimes maybe once or twice a year, and then maybe had a few years.
So you weren't a semi-pro?
No, not at all. Absolutely. Just, but I still had this thing in my mind. And what happened then, I started to come towards 40. And I think like lots of people, you think about, well, what have I done with my life? What have I done with those childhood dreams? What have I done in terms of actively focusing to be at 40 this person that I'd have loved to have been at 15? And that's where the golf thing came back up again. And I just sort of thought, it inspired me to think, why don't I go and try and see what I could be? And let's give it a year to see.
And that was at what age?
37.
So at 37,
yeah,
you said, I think I can take this to the next level.
I want
to become a professional golfer.
Well, I wanted to try and break par within a year. I wanted to be able to shoot a par or sub-par round. And at that stage, I couldn't break 100. So that was the task, that was the goal, but I was still running the garden centres at that stage. I still had 120 staff with a very busy business. So I was trying to do all of this within the context of having... Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I joke about it in a relatively flippant fashion, but the theory was I mustn't annoy my partners so much that they, turf me out of the business, and I mustn't get divorced. And, so I need to try and cram all of this in, as well as working the guts of 50 hours a week. But those were the basic rules, and I sort of gave up and focused on that almost to the detriment of nearly everything else. But as I say, while still not massively annoying my wife.
So your idea behind it was, this is what I want to do.
Yes.
And then you think, okay, well, this is how I'm going to do it.
Yes.
Which was basically model anybody or everybody who you thought was worth modelling.
Very much so.
Obviously, very importantly, Seve.
Yes.
You read, and I suppose, and hit a lot of balls and practiced a lot, but you did this intensively.
Yes.
For a year.
Yes.
And when you decided that this is what you wanted to do, and you asked a professional golfer, you mentioned he gave you the title, didn't he?
Well, this is it. Yes. Well, I had a very clear idea in my mind that I thought actually this was possible, and I don't really know where that belief came from. I think with any challenge like this, it's incredibly important to have that belief. But I did have it to begin with. It was probably coupled with a little bit of naivety. But
did you see yourself playing? Did you have a feeling?
I have
you had all these pictures.
Spectacularly overly imagination. Yeah. And I used that all the time. I played that round, that perfect round of golf every night as I went to sleep. So I used a lot of those kinds of techniques. As you say, I modelled a lot. I watched the Seve short game video endlessly over and over and over again.
You visualised all these
situations? I literally slurped myself into... It's a revolting term into Seve,
yeah.
Because I wanted to feel as if when I play, even all my short game, I am imagining myself with his white shirt, the blue Slazenger V-neck and the shoes. I even talk like Seve in my...
You see through his eyes.
I do the whole thing. All of my... I talk like Seve in my head. I mean, this is a slightly, embarrassing admission, but that's the way I play my short game. And that was one of the key techniques in the whole thing.
Other techniques you had was, obviously, you said you had Seve there with you all the time.
Yeah.
Now, was he standing there with you? He was talking to you? Was he giving you advice?
He was, yes, to a stand. As I said, most of it was relatively silent. But,
You had his presence. He was there.
I had his presence there. And to come back to what we were saying earlier, yes, it was Sam Torrance who then told a friend of mine to dream on. So I had I tried to get hold of Sevi, but of course Sevi was already ill at that stage. But I had a lot of current big name golfers saying to me that it wasn't possible. But I think if you can create this mental map of, if you have Sevi, and I also used Ben Hogan a lot, if you can have these characters out there, these utterly inspirational characters, whether they are alive or not, that you can have there perhaps providing you with that, what you can do it. Just keep at it, keep going. You can manage to push away a lot of that negative thought that's coming through. Not necessarily. Sam Torrance didn't mean anything bad by it. He was just presented with a slightly daft story, so he came up with that. But
which seemed pretty unbelievable at the time.
Well, yes, I think it was, and I think the other thing was I was blogging about it on the internet, and as you very well know, it's very, very easy for anybody to knock down anybody attempting to do anything different or interesting on the internet. As you said there with your keyboard, in Australia, perhaps in your underpants, not actually doing anything. When somebody else is trying to do something, it's very easy just to hurl abuse. And I got a lot of abuse for even trying to do that. So I think you have to create these, whether they are real people around you who can support or virtual, like my Sevi and Ben Hogan and so on. I think it's an incredibly important part of the process.
I love the whole story, obviously, of modelling, and that's basically how you.
Sure.
That's where excellence comes from. Do you know what I mean? It's studying successful
Yeah.
people, studying their behaviours, looking at what they do, and obviously trying to replicate it and install and learn those strategies. Now, how did you keep motivated? Okay, because you still got to get up in the morning, you've still got to read, you've got to work, and people are telling you you're not going to do it. What the hell are you doing? How do you keep motivated?
Well, I break that down into a couple of different categories. I always think it's very easy that we could sit here now and decide that we wanted to make £1 million over the next, 6 months doing a particular project. And we could sit here and imagine that, wouldn't it be lovely to do that? And you would go and buy a yacht or whatever it is with your money, and I would do whatever it was with mine. But actually, it's very difficult to an extent unless you are hugely motivated by that towards goal. Sometimes you can just sit and dream about that and not do anything about it. What I did was I did a lot of balancing of the towards goal of shooting the subpar round and the feeling of how great that would be with the humiliation of not doing it, so the away from goal. And approximately 2/3 of us are much more motivated by moving away from something, moving away from the pain, than we are towards the exciting thing. So if you can metaphorically push that button in yourself towards the thing, to moving away from that situation that you're in now, whether it's a bad golfer or a bad business or, a house that you hate being in or, any type of goal, rather than, if you keep focusing on that and about the fact that you're fed up with that you're fed up with the humiliation of that, even though it's really quite an unpleasant emotion, it can be a very strong motivator to get yourself up off the couch, turn EastEnders off, and go and do something about it.
That propelled you to do it.
Exactly. So I focused a lot. When I would when I come home in the evening and I was tired, and really, obviously, as I say, I was annoying my wife, and to get myself off the sofa and back up to the range, that's what I did. I focused on the people who were saying it wasn't possible and how I wanted to prove them right. And that's the thing that would catapult me up much more so than the perhaps thinking how great the subpar round would be and the feeling.
So what would you say your best assets are?
I think, that's a good question. I suppose
I can think of a few.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I feel that I have managed to analyse enough of this so that I've got to a stage now where I can understand how the process works for lots of us in terms of doing those things. And because I was able to, I don't really take no for an answer. I'm prepared to keep going for more and more examples of how I can do it as yes. So if you say something to me is impossible, most of the time I'm going to think, well, I think there might be somebody over there who might almost be able to do it or might be able to help me. So I keep digging, I keep reading, I keep digging, I keep trying, I keep looking for those little breakthroughs, as long as it matters enough to me, of course, and depending what it is. So if something matters enough to me, I'm very good at getting to the end of it. I had 83 rejections for that book, and I just kept going. And that was the same process. It's exactly the same process.
So is there a voice in the back of your head saying, "Oh, come on, you got to find somebody else who can do this"? Is it a feeling that you get that says,
Well, it's the belief, and I think the belief is of vital importance. I think that's the vital importance that we have to instill in kids, that they can do something. Now, I don't mean daft X Factor type belief that you can go and be a star if you've got no singing voice. I mean the belief based upon the fact that actually, if I can go and shoot a subpar round of golf after a year, then actually anybody can. Because one of the things that kept me going during the years, I discovered this guy in somewhere in the States holds a course record at this course. He shot a 67 and he's only got one arm and one leg and he's got prosthetic limbs. So if he can do it after this horrific combine harvester accident that he had, why on earth can I not do it when I'm healthy and 37 or was 37? So I think that ability to have the belief in the project or whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's business, whether it's personal, whether it's writing a book or whatever, if you can keep that going and keep working at that and surrounding yourself with people, of course, who are of that type. You've got to move away from those people who are sort of the naysayers who say can't do it. It's incredibly important.
Absolutely. You need to be around positive people that are going to be giving you, upbeating you with anything you want to do.
Exactly. And if you get a lot of that, then you spiral up and you keep going. Belief, you've got to keep that belief. It doesn't matter how much you want the goal or how much you want to move away from the thing. If you don't have it underpinned by a belief that you can shoot the subpar round or write a book that people will want to read or change the business or change your life or lose the weight or whatever it is, it's not going to happen.
So you got 83 rejections for your book?
Yes.
Okay. Obviously you kept going.
I kept going, yeah.
And now, how many books have you sold?
Well, I probably on a worldwide basis, I suppose we've maybe sold about 70,000, something 70, like that. Yeah. So it's
I wonder what those other 82 publishers are thinking now.
Well, the interesting thing is one of them keeps contacting my agent and going, what's he doing next? Please don't cut us out of this. So yeah, it's that's a nice feeling. But it's it's a very transient feeling. You feel it's going to be wonderful to go, to those people. But actually, it's not about that. It's interesting.
And the interesting thing is, I think that's kind of the beauty of where we live in now, technology, and is that if you have an idea and you believe in it, you can go and publish it yourself.
Absolutely.
You can create a blog. I mean, you read stories of people that write blogs, all of a sudden they've got, a book deal. So, there's no reason to not go forward and follow your dream.
Very much so.
To find out more about our latest projects, get a free coaching lesson, or download my book, go to www.bernardo-moya.com.
Okay, so what fascinated me about your book was that, all the whole service story. So what would you like to teach others when it came down to, because I know you're involved in obviously teaching people how to, run their coffee shops, and you've got a couple of things about obviously the golf as well. Yeah. But what else would you like to teach others?
Well, I think we're doing a lot of work with a number of other different training organisations, and I do a lot of hands-on work with coffee shops and but beyond that, because that's very practical work that we do. But beyond that, one of the things that we've been working on and discovered is that basically most of these projects have managed to put me into that sort of top 1%. And when you get into the top 1% of whatever the market is, even if it's a sales guy, kind of magical things happen. 86% of Americans say they would like to write a book. Only 1% ever do. Exactly. And out of that sort of 1.2 million books that are on sale in the US, a tiny fraction, less than 2%, ever sell more than 5,000 copies. So if you can really stick at that thing and get yourself into that top 1%, as I say within the book, amazing things do happen, as we discussed earlier. It's being made into a film now. So doors open to those people who really stick their neck out. And the same thing with the golf. Less than 1% of golfers ever break par. But it is a wonderful feeling to feel that you have nobody ever masters golf, but have mastered it to an extent where you can take that par level and have managed to reach that. So what I think the point is, if you can, and we've broken it down, that most of those projects took me about 1,000 hours. 20 hours a week over a year. If you can put 20 hours a week over a year on top of what you're doing into dedicated, focused, hard work towards that goal, whatever it may be, whatever the expertise is. The sales guy puts an extra 20 hours in to really, really get good at it. I don't just mean doing a few extra calls. I mean continual improvement. You can put yourself into that top 1%. I'm not a writer. I failed my English literature. I got a C in my my ordinary English language. But I managed to get a book out there by really learning to an extent what it is, the type of book that people want to read as much as anything else. You can, if you keep digging over a year, you can make massive transformations in your life. And I think that's the message that fascinates me more than anything else, rather than people thinking, I can't do it, or, I'm never going to be one of those guys because of all of these reasons. If you really put the head down for a year, and almost for whatever it is, you can get very good at something. Now, I'm not talking about a sort of a 10,000 hours Malcolm Gladwell becoming Tiger Woods. That's a whole different game. What I'm saying is, to be the top 1%, in almost anything, it doesn't take much more than about 1,000 hours of really dedicated focus.
And that's the thing. The thing is, really, I think it's down to society. Is kind of the limiting beliefs that are out there,
for sure,
with the younger generation,
for sure.
Kids coming out of schools or unis or whatever, and they're thinking, "Wow, it's impossible."
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts regarding society and how things should change and what people should do?
Well, I think one of my major issues with society these days is that we have a sort of the personal responsibility has been taken away. You have whether it's at school or at university or in a working environment, you are endlessly protected from bad things. It's very difficult as an employer to sack people these days. I'm not saying that they don't need to be protected. What I'm saying, we have a very strong welfare state. We protect kids endlessly from anything that goes on in life, and all of that removes some sense of taking your own personal responsibility. People are just finding it much too easy to blame the government, to blame their boss, to blame, some variation of some larger body that should be looking after them. And I think that's the thing that depresses me most, rather than sitting down and thinking, okay, if I take complete responsibility for my life, and I can't just go and go and join the dole or whatever, and I really think about trying to do something, and I'm going to keep finding people to help me along the way, then you can do a tremendous amount. But I think it's the lack of personal responsibility is my biggest issue with society. I
think it's down to that kind of the old hunter-gatherer. I think we need to go back to that. You go out, you hunt, you bring food, your family eats.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. You can't expect somebody to come and bring
Exactly,
Now, regarding the education system, I've interviewed a lot of people, and we're all very passionate about making a change, making a difference in the world, and we're willing to give our time and give our expertise. What do you think needs to happen in schools and universities, where, the experts can come in, people who've actually done it, maybe seen it? What's your thoughts?
I think that's incredibly important. One of the when I was at university, we had a small group of lecturers who were part-time, who had been out there in business and were continuing to run business. And those were the guys that we hung on their every word, because it's, as you say, they become those inspirational people. I don't think there is anything like enough of that goes on in schools and even at universities. I think the theory is incredibly important. I think you've got to get that theory, but you've got to have it backed up by people standing there, perhaps only for very short periods of time, and saying, okay, here is this thing that I did in the real world, and here's where it went wrong, because everybody has things that go wrong, and here's what went right, and here's what you can actually do. And I think there's a huge dearth of that within schools. And I don't think I was spoken to anybody of any real interest when I was at school. And as I said, but I remember crystal clearly those guys at university who were out there running businesses, and they'd come in and they'd talk to us, and we just sat like that and listened to them in a way that we didn't do for any of the other lecturers. And as I say, I'm not trying to run the lecturers down, but I think we need much more input between people who have made achievements out there in the real world and the theory, and getting that across.
I completely agree. I think all the teachers do a magnificent job, but the problem is, I think, it's pretty much a curriculum.
Yes.
If you look at the world nowadays, and you look how technology advances and moves and changes just in a matter of years, the educational system seems pretty much the same.
No, very much so.
And I think that's where we need to start looking at how can we model people that have experienced and have the knowledge, and how can we then install those strategies in kids. What would you think are the most important skills nowadays? Okay, and I know there's loads of different kinds of skills for sports, for work, but what would you think are the most important skills, if we had to sum them down?
Well, again, I could start like a stuck record like this, but I just think that ability, the most important skill, I've actually mostly written a book on this, a sort of a business parable. The most important skill that anybody can have in their business and in their life is that complete responsibility. It's that ability to sit there and think, this business or my income is entirely dependent upon me. if I take complete responsibility for that, really pretty amazing things happen. And I think from a basic skill perspective, everything comes out of that. If you take complete responsibility for it, then you realize that actually you are as you say, the hunter-gatherer perspective, my kids are not going to eat, at some stage, or you're not going to have a pension. And I mean, the way that people avoid any form of preparation for their retirement, is a huge problem that we're going to have in the future. So I think if you can take that perspective and think, okay, my kids will not eat. There's no protective net here. If I don't focus on that, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the advantage of technology nowadays, because we say, oh, well, training is expensive. Well, it's not. Mm-hmm. I mean, you go on YouTube and you find millions of hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
You found downloads, ebooks, there's so much content out there. Sure. But I think that's part of what is missing, is people need to understand the importance of re-educating and reinventing yourself.
Mm-hmm. And as you say, you can literally find anything on YouTube now. You can pay folk like us large amounts of money in various forms to go and see and listen to the various other bits and pieces. But if you don't have a single penny, you can go onto YouTube and you can literally find somebody presenting the answer to almost any problem that is out there. It's an incredible resource. The internet as a whole has lots of problems, but it is a wonderful resource for people thinking, I want to get from A to B. There will be articles, videos, whatever out there. Now, you might have to dig around a bit. They may not all be perfectly positioned for what it is that you're trying to do. But there's no doubt that the information, the situation that we're in now is astonishing in terms of kids and young folk trying to then get good or better at something or learn a skill. Fantastic.
You've taught a lot of people. Who has helped you?
Well, one of the interesting things that I find is if you stick your neck out in anything, some people will try and chop your head off, or at the very least do that sort of tall poppy thing that they talk about in Australia. If you put your head above the parapet, it will get chopped off. But if you stick your neck out and do something interesting, what you find is that lots of people do come on and go, that's interesting. What can I do to help? So along the way, when our first business went down, there were 3 or 4 people who came along and were extremely beneficial to us, just because they knew we had done something great in the past, made a mistake, and then helped us to get going again. I had 2 or 3 people during that golf year who were incredibly beneficial to me, without any expectation of being paid. I think it's just, it's certainly in every part of my business. I think if you're prepared to go out there and be seen to do anything interesting, people just, not everybody, but small and important groups of people do sort of flock to you and can be very beneficial.
And my final question, we're on a mission. What would you like your legacy to be?
Oh, again, a good question. I mean, I think about, I suppose, as you get older, you think a lot about the legacy. I think it's very easy for me to think about the perspective of, from a personal perspective, I want to be able to lie there on my deathbed and not think, I wish I had done this thing. And having had the book printed and the other couple of books too, and done that golf process and having run a few businesses, those are all things in my mind that I can sit there and know that on my deathbed, I think, at least I tried. I did give those things a go. Some of them worked. They didn't all work. But I think beyond that, I suppose the broader sense of that legacy from that, because that's a very selfish thing to an extent. I think, almost me lying on my deathbed and thinking, yeah, well done, John. I'm trying to metaphorically pat myself on the back. But I would love to feel that some of those projects that I've got involved with and some of that additional work that we do now, and I know it has certainly from a golf perspective, because we've inspired a lot of people with some of the online instruction that we do, to make that difference, to think, yes, I think I'm at this position here, I'm at A, and I can get to B. So I think the legacy of being able to get people to maybe make a big change in their life, away from a situation that isn't satisfying to them. That's what I'd like it to be.
Brilliant. John, thank you very much. I really enjoyed
Pleasure.
it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for viewing Inspiring People. And until the next time, thank you very much.
For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co.